The following program is sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Welcome to About Money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments, surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared on the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
It is Saturday, and we are talking about money here on 1590 AM The Answer. The Answer about money. Yes, indeed. So, what a week it's been. Have the trade wars begun? It's pretty early. Got to see what's happening for the next couple days. Next week, I will probably begin to talk about trade wars again if we start to see responses from China and from Europe and from wherever. It certainly has the potential to boil over into a trade war. That is a lose-lose situation. It just doesn't work. But we'll come back to that. Right now I want to talk about some things. I have predictions to make. You know, being in this business, you're always looking forward. You're looking toward making an investment and making that investment work, making sure that, or doing the best you can anyway, to be sure that the investment works out close. Not all investments work out. Not everything I do works out. But the idea is to make most of them. But I spent a little time looking at some of the predictions that have been made over the past, and I found an article in Fortune. It goes back a couple years about the predictions that were made about technology. And I have one that I want to talk about at the end of this, but we'll get to there. In 1876, William Preece of the British Post Office said, "The Americans have need of the telephone, but we do not. We have plenty of messenger boys." Those were the Brits. Americans needed the telephone. The Brits didn't. Well, we know how that worked out. 1876, William Morton, the president of Western Union, said, "This telephone has too many shortcomings to be seriously considered as a means of communication." That was 1876. 1889, Thomas Edison said, "Fooling around with alternating current is just a waste of time. Nobody will ever use it." That was Thomas Edison. Very shortly after that, of course, it was in use, and it is today. 1903, "The horse is here to stay, but the automobile is only a novelty, a fad." That was the president of Michigan Savings Bank advising Henry Ford's lawyer, Horace Rockman, not to invest in the Ford Motor Company. Sometimes you get bad investment advice. Sometimes this new technology. Well, I guess at that time it was new technology in 1903. In 1921, the wireless music box has no imaginable commercial use. Who would pay for a message sent to no one in particular? And in 1946, television won't be able to hold to any market it captures for the first 6 months. People will soon get tired of staring at a plywood box every night. That was Darryl Zanuck of 20th Century Fox, the guy that made movies. In 1955, nuclear-powered vacuum cleaners will probably be a reality within the next 10 years. Can you imagine running around your house with a nuclear-powered vacuum cleaner? That was Alex Lute, the president of Lute Vacuum Cleaner Company. Have you ever heard of a Lute vacuum cleaner? It's probably because you don't have a nuclear-powered vacuum cleaner. Neither did he. 1959, before man reaches the moon, your mail will be delivered within hours from New York to Australia by guided missiles. We stand on the threshold of rocket mail. That was the U.S. Postmaster General, Arthur Summerfeld, who made that prediction. 1961, there's practically no chance communications space satellites will be used to provide better telephone, telegraph, television, or radio service inside the United States. That was Craven, the Federal Communications Commissioner. Time magazine came out in 1966 and said, remote shopping, while entirely feasible, will flop. Guess nobody told Amazon that. 1981, Marty Cooper, an inventor, said cell phones will absolutely not replace the local wire systems. Brilliant. And Robert Metcalfe, the founder of 3Com, said, I predict the internet will soon go spectacularly supernova, and in 1996, catastrophically collapse. He said that in 95, that by 96 it would collapse. And in 2005, Steve Chen, the CTO, Chief Technical Officer and co-founder of YouTube, said, there's just not that many videos that I want to watch. Of course, today, YouTube in 1 month does almost as much programming as all three networks did in their entire lifetime. In 2006, David Pogue of the New York Times said, everyone's always asking when Apple will come out with a cell phone. My answer is probably never. And just a year later, Steve Ballmer, the Microsoft CEO, said, there's no chance the iPhone is going to get any significant market share. We know how those predictions all turned out. But there's one that was made in 2015 that I've mentioned once before. It was the CEO of ConocoPhillips, the petroleum company, that said electric vehicles won't have a material impact for another 50 years. Probably not in my lifetime. You know, with that in mind, it gives you some idea of some of the predictions that have been made and some of the great ideas which have grown out of the impossible. We're in a time of real change. We're in a time when there's some major issues and where things change, and I think as investors, you need to be thinking about the changes that are going on. I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think by the early 2020s, oil prices will begin to decline and decline dramatically. There'll be a surplus, even if we produce no more oil than we're producing today. We're seeing a change in what goes on. Mandelbaum and Friedman wrote a book that was labeled That Used to Be Us. And they said, issues facing the United States and the rest of the world, there are a number of issues and some that are completely diametrically opposed. One issue is climate change. And climate change is going on. Over 90% of scientists believe that global warming is actually happening, and it's happening because we're putting carbon emissions into the atmosphere. I've used the example before of summertime driving a car into a mall or a shopping place or a parking place where it's in the sun. You've got the air conditioning on. Inside the car, it's a comfortable 70 degrees or 69 degrees or whatever you keep the temperature at. You get out of the car, close the car, you go shopping, you go to the movie, you go to wherever you're going, and you come back and you open the door to the car, and the temperature has risen. It may be only 80 degrees outside or 75 degrees outside, but the temperature inside the car has already reached 90 degrees. The reason that happens is because you have the sun rays shining down on the car, and those rays normally on the sidewalk or in the trees would be bouncing off, but in your car, it's captured. That's what happens with global warming. We have this cover of CO2, and the sun rays hit the earth, they bounce back, but they come back down because the heat is captured. We have that going on. But we also have a time in which, and I've talked about this any number of times, and I've been talking about it since 2012, we have a supercycle where the world GDP is growing at a faster rate than normal. And not only that, the reason we're in this third phase of this supercycle is because of the emerging nations, those developing nations, and they're consuming a significant amount of energy. The prediction is that we're going to need 28% more energy by 2040 than we consume today. And in places like China already consumes 29% of the world's energy. We consume 21%. Between the two countries, we consume 50%. But the fastest growing areas are outside of China. But even in China, by 2040, their energy needs are going to increase by 56%, and the rest of the world is going to increase by 73%. Think about the demand that is on the energy. China and India alone will require half of the energy that's consumed. And right now, coal and oil and natural gas, they burn that energy to release into the and release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And they are the cheapest parts of power. But what we're seeing is a real change. And when there's a change going on, and when you're looking at these things, there's always an investment opportunity that follows. There'll be winners and there'll be losers. You want to be on the winning side and not on the losing side. By 2050, the International Energy Agency says $45 trillion will be invested in global energy. 45 trillion. Don't go away. We're going to talk about some of those areas and why and what to do. We'll be right back after this commercial break. Stay with me. We've got a lot to cover.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I've been talking about energy and what's happening because there's tremendous changes going on. The IEE says that $45 trillion will be spent between now and 2040 on changes to the energy system. 45 trillion. If you look at the average annual numbers for energy consumption and compare that to media information, if you take all the computers, all the computer systems, movies, all the radio, the newspapers, the magazines, TV, all that media is less than $1 trillion a year. Energy itself is, the last figures I can find date back to 2012, and they're $7 trillion. That's a huge amount of flow going through. That's a huge part of the world GDP. And over the next 15 years, there's going to be dramatic changes in how we consume energy. You know, up until this time, coal and oil have been the primary sources of energy. We're already seeing at this point that coal is beginning to taper off and has a curve which is beginning to slope down. My prediction is that by the early 2020s, we'll see the same thing begin to happen with oil. And why? If you look at automobiles, that coming back to the prediction that I talked about, 2015, the CEO of ConocoPhillips, CEO Ryan Lance, said that electric vehicles wouldn't have a material impact for another 50 years. That goes back only 3 years ago, less than 3 years ago that he made that prediction. When he came out with that prediction, within a couple weeks, I came out and said I didn't believe it. I believed that within the next 10 years, we would see at least 25% of the cars be electric cars. Now I think that my prediction of 25% is probably low. And when you look at transportation, if you look at the total amount of energy consumed for transportation, 25% of all energy consumed is consumed by transportation. Total energy. So, and of that energy, half of all oil is consumed in the transportation industry. If you begin to replace that with electricity, electrical cars, with electrical transportation, you cut down a significant consumption of our oil. And I would say by the early 2020s, 5 years from now, we're going to see enough cut in oil demand that there'll be an excess of oil demand. We'll start to see oil prices drop again. And we're going to start to see companies and countries feel the impact of that. But it's at the same time, as we look forward to that, and if you look right now at renewable energy, only a few years ago it was only a couple percent. Today it stands at 13% of energy produced is renewable energy, wind and solar, a little bit of geothermal and hydropower as well. But the growth is in solar and wind, and there'll be some geothermal as well. But there's issues that come with that as well. Battery prices have come down dramatically. But when you look at the distribution, as we put in more solar power, for example, it's going to require transmission lines to move the solar power from those places where it's very cheap to produce solar to those places where it's more expensive, where it'll make more sense to buy the power from solar producing areas. And yet, even when you look at the time of year, the solar energy that's generated in the summertime, you don't have a lot of storage capacity to move it and save it for wintertime. There's going to be some issues that are involved, and those issues, every time you have an investment that can be made, you have investment opportunities. I've used this a number of times before. I've said, if you look at the blue chip stocks, 1966, they included companies like Anaconda Copper, American Can, American Tobacco, Bethlehem Steel, Chrysler, General Foods, Goodyear, Johns Manville, Owen, Illinois, Swift & Company, Sears, Texas Corp, Union Carbide, U.S. Steel, Westinghouse Electric, and Woolworth. You know, the conventional wisdom as people get older is to be more conservative, to invest in the blue chips. Those were the blue chips in 1966. If you looked at 1966, there's companies that didn't exist that are part of the Dow today: Microsoft, Intel, Southwestern Bell, Home Depot, Walmart. McDonald's came public in 1966. Plus you add Costco and Starbucks and Genentech and Amgen and Qualcomm and Cisco and Salesforce.com. You add all those companies, they didn't exist in 1966. Richard Foster, a professor at Yale, estimates that in the 1920s, the average company that was part of the Standard & Poor's 500 in the 1920s had an average life of 70 years. Today, the average life of an S&P 500 company is 15 years. You know, think about even the cell phone. You know, I can remember at one time in the 1980s, we bought a mobile phone. It was this big clunky thing that was like a brick. It was huge. You know, not very portable, stuck it in a car, you didn't carry it in your pocket. And then came the Palm. If you're around a while, you remember the Palm and the stylus. You had to learn a new way to write with the stylus. But that was a very big technical breakthrough, the Palm. And then came the BlackBerry, and it had a keyboard, and you could type on it, and you could send email on your phone. The BlackBerry. And then, of course, came Apple with a screen in which you could move your fingers across and move things around, and came with all sorts of applications. And no longer was it just a keyboard for email and a phone, but it became a mini computer with more computing power than computers had in 1980s. Incredible, the changes that take place. But it's not just the changes that take place. Think of how fast those changes are taking place. Energy is one of those areas in which there's going to be tremendous opportunity in solar, in bioengineered type things, because there are experiments going on using bioengineered bacteria, for example, to generate energy. There's a couple professors at Penn State that have developed the cylinder with one end a anode, one's a cathode, and they put wastewater into it. And they've modified some E. coli bacteria. And bacteria, when they are growing, when they are metabolizing, they produce electricity. So you put those modified E. coli bacteria in this cylinder, put in wastewater, and they clean the water and create electricity at the same time. We're just at the beginning of some breakthroughs. Those are going to be some tremendous investment opportunities. And at the same time, the big companies that exist today, like the ConocoPhillips, the BPs, and Exxons, may be the dinosaurs of the past. Lots of things going on, lots of predictions, and I hope my predictions don't fall into those categories that I read at the beginning of the program. That wraps that up. I want to introduce my guest today, Leslie, if I say it right, Feinsack.
That's right.
From VentureKits. Welcome to the program, Leslie.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
So why don't we start with your background?
Sure. So I've been in the technology industry for about a decade. And prior to that, I had been working in the consumer goods industry. I moved to America in 2005 for an MBA at Harvard.
And you moved here from
Costa Rica.
From Costa Rica.
Yeah, talk about those beautiful. Alaska flies straight there now, so everybody should be visiting in the cold winter months.
It is a wonderful place to visit. We were there a couple of years ago.
And yeah, a couple of years ago, I started my own company after I became a mom, and that is VentureKits. VentureKits are games that teach kids entrepreneurial skills and leadership skills through play, through kind of free activity, a safe place to try different things and fail, to ask questions, and to exercise their the core of their American values of entrepreneurship.
One of the things you hear from a lot of business people is that schools don't teach. They teach math, they teach English, they teach typing, they teach a lot of skills, but they don't teach much about business. And what you're talking about is teaching about not only business, but entrepreneurship.
Yeah, so I think of it in a couple of ways. First, it's not strictly business skills as much as they are entrepreneurial skills, like the skills to build something out of nothing, which is like, I think it's what's going to really set our kids up for success in the future. So I think, I work in technology. My husband is a software engineer at Google. He builds robots, think about artificial intelligence a lot. And I'm a mom, and I think about, what do I want to arm my child with to ensure that she can handle whatever is thrown at her in the future. So I think as we move towards a future where more and more jobs can be automated, right? More and more technical measurable skills can be automated.
We're going to come back and talk about that.
To my really interesting point.
Right after this commercial break.
Great.
You want to hear, because I think this is really breakthrough technology. So don't go away. We've got more to discuss.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I'm here with Leslie Feinsack, if I pronounced that right, of VentureKits. We started talking about it, and so explain it again, and we'll talk about it in more detail.
Yeah, of course. So coming out of the technology industry, and I think a lot about the future of employment. I actually think a lot about the current state of employment as well. And where Venture Kits came from was an observation that, on the one hand, kids today, what they're really learning is digital first, right? So we have like a whole generation of children that is growing up in the digital world, for better or worse, however you feel about that. But the reality of it is that our kids know how to chat and they know how to code better than they know how to communicate. And on the other hand, if you read kind of literature from the World Economic Forum or just any of these large organizations that talk about the future of employment, the skills that are really going to become critical in the future for human employment are the things that machines can't do, right? Emote, communicate, improvise, trial and failure, pure creativity in the old sense of the word.
Yeah, the estimates are that 40% of today's existing jobs will not exist in 20 years.
And the job titles that will exist in 20 years are things that we don't even know about today.
It's going to be using the human brain more and more and more.
Exactly. So, I think of the things that I do as an entrepreneur every day, and those are exactly the kind of things that I want my daughter to be able to do, right? Like fundamentally understanding customers, asking questions of people, being curious, having enough strength to try something and fail at it and then try it again. So those are the things that I try to develop with Venture Kits. And then the second thing that is really unique about them is this idea that, I think back to Tom Sawyer. Do you remember Tom Sawyer?
Yes.
Yeah. So do you remember when he was painting the fence?
Yes.
So that story really resonated with me my whole life. And maybe it's because I personally find joy in creating. Like I find joy in my job and my work. And I kind of want my daughter to face life that same way, that like work can be joyful and work can be playful and work can be fun if you do something that you really love. And that's why I wanted to, a lot of people tell me that, are you just trying to like make kids work harder and pack another activity into their already packed schedule? And it's not like that at all. It's all about finding activities that feel fun to you. And hopefully some of those activities are also revenue generating in the future. So then you never have to work a day in your life, right?
Yes. So take us through, the Venture Kit itself are geared toward what ages?
All kids, boys and girls, starting at 7 years old. So we have 3 kits, and the one that's for older kids has a little bit more technical business concepts in there. So you calculate how to estimate your cost of goods sold, for example, and you do a little pricing research and everything to calculate a price. So it has more traditional business concepts, whereas the one that's for younger kids is a little bit more playful, more whimsical, more play pretend. But they're all about kind of starting a project and seeing it through, and feeling like you built something by yourself.
That's great. And so take us through the process for a child opens the kit and starts the process.
Yeah. So, when I first designed Venture Kits, I wrote a business plan for a lemonade stand. That's exactly how the whole thing started. I was like, if I were to do a lemonade stand, like, how would I do it? And I wrote this little business plan, and then I have a little bit of a background in game design from some time that I spent at Big Fish Games. And then I'd spent a lot of time working in online entertainment as well. So what I did was I took that business plan and broke it into short, easy, discrete steps. I tried to optimize for the steps that included more creativity, because what I found was the kids enjoyed the creative more than they enjoyed the pure calculation sides of it. So you do things like make signs and create advertising and come up with a creative name for your company. So I broke it down into these small accomplishable steps, and created little completion rewards at the end of every step. So it really feels like you are kind of moving through the levels of a game, rather than like checking off chores, if that makes sense.
So it is set up game-wise.
Yeah, it's set up to be like I think of it as a gamified business plan.
And yet it's a learning experience as well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so when I look at my daughter, all play is learning. And I don't think you realize that until you become a parent and you watch your kids. Like if you really watch a child playing, play is about learning, right? It's about discovering. Like I literally these days, I have seen her discover physics, like things, like gravity, and she's shocked by it. And then we have a helium balloon and she's like, wait, that defies gravity. So I think all play is learning, and I'm trying to really, really play into that. One of the decisions that I made early on, and I get a little bit of flack for this because, mind you, I'm a technologist, right? But venture kits are physical. They come in a box. They arrive in the mail. They have like what we call paper sizzle inside, so that things don't move so much. Like they're physical boxes that you play with your hands. And I felt that like that was somehow really, really important. Even though obviously it's a lot more scalable if I turn them into software, but it's really important to me that like the kids have something that they physically open and that they like create with their hands and engage their whole bodies, as opposed to just sit in front of a screen and like shut out the rest of the world.
So it's really, really interesting and fascinating. So tell us how people would find venture kits. How would they order one? How would they get one? You said that you have 3 different kits, one for ages 7 to...
Yeah, so I have 3 different kits. One is for the younger range. That's an art auction kit. And the fun thing about Venture Kits Art Auction is they create art, but then they also learn how to put on a real live auction. We have like an auctioneer paddles and a script and everything, so they put on the whole show. One of our customers described it as like a really great family dinner party activity, because you basically bring friends to your home and then, put the kids in a separate room to like put together the whole art and prepare the auction, and the adults can have dinner, and then at the end of the dinner, the kids kind of put on an auction for the grown-ups. So that's for the younger kids. And then we have a talent show, which is like live entertainment business for the middle range, so about 8 to 12 years old. And then we have a bakery, which is for kids around 10 to 13 years old. And that one is the one that has a little bit more math involved, more like concrete business concepts. So how would somebody find? Yeah, you can find them. So we sell online only. You can go to venturekits.com. That's venturekits with a T, as in Tom Sawyer.
So spell it for us.
VentureKits.com.
And you can order it all through there.
Yep, you can order it right there.
It's a great thing. And it's a great teaching tool. And it really addresses this whole issue of teaching kids about a part of business, entrepreneurship. And I also happen to believe that in the future, entrepreneurship is going to become more and more important, not just in the U.S., but worldwide. And we have an advantage because of our country and our culture. So what you're doing, I think, makes tremendous sense. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So it's time to think baseball. It is. The season is opening, and baseball season is one of those times there's so much optimism. It's a lot like investments sometimes. In the modern baseball era, and I seem to talk about this every spring. Every spring when baseball season opens, I tend to get excited about baseball because I like baseball. If you go to football, it's cold. I like baseball because it's warm. I also like it because it's very statistical, and as a mathematician, stats really add up. There's 161 games, and you look at all the stats and all those things. I really like it. But if you look at the modern baseball era, from 1903 to 1951, there were 7 players who hit over 400. That's 4 out of 10 times they get a hit when they're at bat. It was done 12 times. So several players did it multiple times. Ted Williams, of course, is the most famous, but you had Stan the Man Musial, you had others that did it. They hit 400. Since 1951, no one has hit 400. Not a single player, not once, not any player. Edgar was up there. You had Wade Boggs that was up there. You had Brett. But nobody was able to spend the whole season and make it over 400. And all of those players that I mentioned were truly great hitters. But no one hit 400. If you also look at that period of time, from 1903 to 1950, the batting average for players ranged from 250 to 260. The time from 1951 until the present day, the average of all players has been 250 to 260. So if you look at it, the average has been the same, whether it was in the early part or the later part. But in the early part, we had some people who were excessive. We're going to come back to it right after the commercial break and talk about what's gone on in life. Don't go away. It has some investment applications to it.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So, in the baseball era, modern baseball era, from 1903 to 1950, seven players, 12 different occasions, hit 400 for a season. Has not happened since 1950. And yet the average for players, if you look at all the players, has been the same from that early era to the current era. And the reason we haven't seen anyone hit 400 is because the standard deviation has shrunk. From an average standard deviation in baseball of 40.6 in 1921, by 2003, it had reduced to 26. So what's a standard deviation? If you look at that bell-shaped curve, it's the thickness of that curve, how steep it is, how tight it is. And what I'm saying is, in the early baseball era, it was much wider, much flatter. In the current era, it's contracted, so it's much tighter, it's much smaller, and it's made a significant difference. And the reason that's happened is because today's players are so much better. 1982, the Mariners had drafted a pitcher by the name of Mike Moore. He was a pitcher who threw 95 miles an hour. That was a big deal in 1982. That was one of the fastest in all of baseball. Maybe there were two or three others that could throw the ball at 95 miles an hour. Well, today, there's a lot of pitchers who throw 100 miles an hour. The Mariners, in fact, had a minor leaguer who threw 105 miles an hour. There are pitchers who their average pitch is 100 miles an hour. That is what's happened. The hitters have become better. The pitchers have become better, and that whole curve has tightened up. It's much more difficult to hit 400 today than it was back then. The same thing has happened in the investment world. In 2013, Credit Suisse did a report and found the name of the report was Alpha and the Paradox of Skill. And they were looking just at large cap mutual funds. But they found that the standard deviation from 1967 had declined from 16% to 6%. That curve had contracted and become much narrower in the modern era, and it continues to happen today. Fama and French. Fama showed the Nobel Economics Prize in 2013. Sorry, not 1913. He's not quite that old. 2013. What Fama and French of the University of Chicago found is that only 1 or 2% of managers actually outperform. FOMA found only 7% of money managers do as well to earn their fees, which means when you take their performance less their fees, it just equals the benchmark. You know, I've been fortunate in actually doing better than that. But, you know, what's happened is the curve has gotten much smaller. It's a rising skill set. It's not due to the number of firms or the number of mutual funds or the number of money managers. It's not due to the age of people. It's due to the fact that the skill level and the access to information has gotten better. You know, the competition has become much stiffer as well. As fees have gone down, so has the competition increased. And that's why you begin to find articles that are published in financial magazines, the ones that are sent out to financial advisors, that say, you know, 4% is a decent return. 5%. I can remember seeing an article in a magazine called Financial Advisor, or actually it was an article in Investment News that said 5%, above 5%, when the Standard & Poor's was up 13% for the year. 5% was a very good return, and anything over 5% was too much risk. You know, with modern portfolio theory grew out of the idea that there was something new and the market was efficient. You know, if you look at it, and I've talked a few times about analogies with physics or chemistry or biology. There's certain laws that exist. The law of gravity, you can count on it, you can measure it. You can actually predict how things will behave. You know, economists would like to have the same kind of thing. Financial advisors would like to have the same kind of thing. To have something that's completely predictable. Something that says, this is how the markets operate. You know, it goes back to the University of Chicago and the development of this theory that the market was efficient. Had to be efficient, because if it wasn't efficient, then you couldn't develop a theory around it. So it's an efficient market. The only way to improve return is to increase risk. That was the thought. Markowitz in 1952 did a dissertation paper in which he divided the movement of a stock into two parts. The part that was due to the market and the part that was due to the company itself, alpha and beta. So when you hear people talk about alpha and beta, it goes back to that paper that was done, that academic study that was done in 1952. It was the idea of trying to come up with a mathematical method, a quantitative method, of describing stocks and the stock market and why it behaved as it did behave. And the reality is, all of that really dates back to a guy by the name of Irving Fisher back in the 1920s, who really wanted to make a mathematical description of the stock market. And he actually went broke because he tried to do that. Never saw 1929 coming, just as a lot of economists didn't see 2008 coming. But Markowitz has gotten a lot of press. Alpha and beta. People talk about smart beta. People talk about achieving alpha. It assumes that those relationships hold day in and day out, that they're always going to be there. You know, somebody described the joke about the two economics professors that are walking along the street and believing that all information is known by the stock market, because if you believe that it's not known, if the market has any unknowns, then it's not efficient, is it? So it's the joke about two professors walking along the street, and one sees a $100 bill, and the other one says, if it was really a $100 bill, someone else would have picked it up. That's the claim of the efficient market, is that is something that is completely efficient. All the news is known. There's nothing to be known. Fama, for all his background, is an efficient market theorist. There have been a lot of those. And I'm not. I'm not at all. I'm a bottoms-up approach. I believe that the market is inefficient in the short term and more efficient in the long term because it will eventually even out. I believe that, and it's been said before, that the market is a perception market. When it believes that 2 + 2 = 5, it'll pay 4 3/4 for it all day long. And my corollary is when people believe that 2 + 2 = 3, what they bought at 4 3/4, they'll sell at 3 1/4 all day long. I just want to buy things at 3 1/4 and sell at 4 3/4. And along those lines, Buffett has said, you don't pay the same amount for a baseball player that hits 250 as you do for a player who hits 350. I believe that's also true. Baseball is back, and so are the analogies. I'll be back another week. The baseball season will be rolling by then. Have a great weekend and a great week.
You've been listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you'd like Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared in the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again next Saturday at noon for more About Money with Mike Adams here on AM 1590. The Answer. The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. The following program is sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.